kids of tough dads. When did you see a side of him no one else did? My dad was the kind of guy you didn't mess with. 6'2", hands like catcher's mitts, and a stare that could make you confess to crimes you didn't commit. He ran a landscaping business, barking orders at his crew like a drill sergeant. And at home, he wasn't much different. Rules were ironclad. Home by 9, dishes done before bed, no back talk. My buddies called him the General, half joking, half terrified. Me, I'm Jake, 16, stuck navigating his boot camp vibe with my mom and little brother, Max, who's 10 and already better at staying on dad's good side. I always wondered if there was more to him than the tough guy act, some piece of him he kept locked away. I got my answer last summer, but it came at a cost, and it started with a fight that shook our house to its foundation. Growing up under dad's roof felt like living in a pressure cooker. He wasn't cruel, but he was relentless. If I brought home a C, he'd sit me down for a lecture about owning my future. If I missed a soccer practice, he'd make me run laps in the backyard until my legs burned. Life's not a free ride, Jake, he'd say, his voice like gravel. Mom would try to smooth things over, saying he just wanted us to succeed, but it felt like he was training us for a war we didn't sign up for. Max, being younger, got off easier, but even he knew to keep his head down when dad was in a mood. I didn't hate him, but I craved a moment where he'd just be normal. Maybe crack a joke or tell me he was proud without a butt attached. Deep down, I wondered if he even liked us, or if we were just his responsibility. The summer I turned 16, things were already tense. I'd been working part-time at dad's business, hauling mulch and trimming hedges under the July sun. It was grueling, and dad didn't cut me any slack. "You're not here to goof off," he'd snap if I took a water break too long. I was saving up for a used car, dreaming of the freedom it'd bring, but every paycheck felt like a drop in the bucket. At home, dad was extra edgy because his business was struggling. Some big client had bailed, and he was scrambling to cover payroll. Mom kept trying to cheer him up, but he'd just grunt and disappear into the garage to tinker with his tools. Max and I tiptoed around him, knowing one wrong move could set him off. It all came to a head one muggy evening in late July. Dinner was quiet, just the clink of forks and Mom's nervous small talk about her garden club. Max was rambling about a science fair project, something about building a model rocket, when dad cut him off. "Focus on eating, not yapping," he said, not even looking up from his plate. Max shrank back, and I felt my jaw tighten. I was sick of the silence, sick of dad acting like we were his employees instead of his kids. Before I could stop myself, I muttered, "Maybe he'd talk less if you didn't shut him down all the time." The room froze. Mom's fork hovered midair, and Max's eyes went wide. Dad's head snapped up, his stare boring into me. "What'd you say?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. I knew I should back down, but something in me snapped. "I said you're always on us," I shot back. "Max was just excited, and you act like it's a crime. You treat us like we're failing you every day." Mom gasped. "Jake, honey, let's not." But dad raised a hand, silencing her. He leaned forward, his knuckles white around his glass. "You think you can talk to me like that in my house? After everything I do for you? Everything you do?" I laughed, the sound bitter. "You mean working us like dogs and acting like we're never good enough? I'm busting my butt for your business, and all I get is grief." My voice was shaking now, and I could feel Max staring, but I couldn't stop. Dad stood up, towering over the table. "You're out of line, Jake. You don't know what it takes to keep this family afloat." "Maybe I'd know if you ever talked to us," I shouted, standing too. "You're not a dad, you're a boss." The words hung in the air, and for a second, I thought he might actually hit me. Instead, he pointed at the door. "Get out, now." I didn't think. I just grabbed my sneakers and stormed out, slamming the front door so hard the windows rattled. The night air was thick, crickets chirping like nothing had happened. I walked down our street, my heart pounding, replaying the fight. Part of me felt free, like I'd finally said what I'd been holding in for years. But another part was terrified. What if dad never let me back in? What if I just burned my whole family down? I ended up at the park a few blocks away, sitting on a bench by the empty baseball field. My phone buzzed. "Mom, texting, please home, Jake." He didn't mean it. I didn't reply. I wasn't ready to face him. I sat there for hours, watching the stars come out, trying to figure out why dad was so hard on us. I remembered stories Mom told me about his childhood, how his own dad walked out when he was a kid, leaving his mom to raise 3 boys alone. Dad had to work young, dropping out of high school to help pay bills. Maybe that's why he pushed us so hard, I thought. But it didn't excuse treating us like we were never enough. Around midnight, I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel path. My stomach twisted, expecting some cop telling me to move along. Instead, it was Dad, his work jacket slung over his shoulder, looking tired, not angry, just worn out. He didn't say anything at first, just sat on the bench a few feet away. I braced for a lecture, but he just stared at the field, his hands clasped between his knees. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "You know, I used to play ball out here. Shortstop. Wasn't half bad." I blinked, caught off guard. Dad never talked about his past. Not like that. "Why'd you stop?" I asked, cautious. He shrugged, a small, sad smile tugging at his mouth. "Life got in the way. Had to grow up fast." He paused, then added, "Didn't want that for you and Max. That's why I push you." Maybe I pushed too hard. I didn't know what to say. This wasn't the dad I knew, the one who just kicked me out. He sounded almost sorry, but I was still mad, still hurt. "You didn't just push," I said, my voice tight. "You made us feel like we're failing you, like we're not even your kids, just projects." He flinched, just a little, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Regret, maybe. He didn't argue, didn't defend himself. He just nodded, like he was taking it in. "Come home, Jake," he said quietly. "We'll talk more tomorrow." I followed him back, not because I was ready to forgive him, but because I was too tired to fight anymore. The walk was silent, but it wasn't the usual tense silence. It was like we were both trying to figure out what came next. When we got home, Mom hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, and Max peeked out from his room, whispering, "You okay?" I nodded, but my head was spinning. Dad had shown me a crack in his armor, a glimpse of someone who wasn't just the general, but I didn't know what to do with it, or if it'd last. The morning after our fight, I woke up expecting the house to feel like a battlefield. I'd yelled at Dad, called him out in a way I'd never dared before, and he'd shown up at the park, not to drag me home, but to talk. Actually, talk. That soft-spoken guy who mentioned playing shortstop wasn't the dad I knew, and I wasn't sure what to make of him. Part of me wanted to believe he meant it, that he'd ease up, but another part was braced for him to snap back to being the general, barking orders like nothing happened. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if last night was a fluke or the start of something different. Downstairs, the kitchen was quieter than usual. Mom was flipping pancakes, her usual cheer dialed down, and Max was doodling on a napkin, sneaking glances at me like I was a bomb about to go off. Dad was at the table, sipping coffee, his work boots already on. I hesitated in the doorway, half expecting him to launch into a lecture about respect. Instead, he looked up and nodded, just a quick jerk of his head. "Morning, Jake," he said, his voice neutral, like we hadn't screamed at each other 12 hours ago. I mumbled a morning, back and slid into my chair, grabbing a pancake to avoid eye contact. Mom shot me a small smile, but the air was thick, everyone waiting for someone else to make the first move. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. Got a job today at the community center, he said, not looking at any of us. They need the garden redone. Could use an extra hand. He paused, then added, Jake, you in? I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. Dad never asked me to work with him. He just told me. And after last night, I figured he'd want me as far away as possible. Max's eyes widened, and Mom's eyebrows shot up, but I kept my face blank. Sure, I said, trying to sound casual, though my heart was racing. Was this his way of making up, or was I walking into a trap? The community center was a rundown brick building, a few miles from our house, with a patchy lawn and a garden that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Dad's crew was already there, unloading shovels and bags of soil from the truck. I'd worked with them before, but today felt different. Dad didn't bark at me to get moving or criticize my technique. He just handed me a rake and said, start over there by the fence. I nodded, waiting for the catch, but he turned away, talking to his foreman, Pete, about drainage plans. I got to work, raking up dead leaves and pulling weeds, my mind spinning. Was this his version of a peace offering, or was he just too tired to fight? As the morning wore on, I kept stealing glances at Dad. He was in his element, directing the crew with that commanding voice, but he wasn't as harsh as usual. He even laughed once when Pete tripped over a hose, a low chuckle I barely recognized. Around noon, a woman from the community center came out, Miss Rivera, who ran the after-school programs. She was short with a no-nonsense vibe, but her smile was warm. This is looking amazing, Tom, she said to Dad. The kids are gonna love it. Dad shrugged, wiping sweat off his forehead. Just doing our job, he said, but I caught a flicker of pride in his eyes. Miss Rivera turned to me, her smile widening. You must be Jake. Your dad says you're a hard worker. I nearly dropped my rake. Dad said that? About me? I mumbled a thanks, my face burning, and glanced at him, but he was busy adjusting a wheelbarrow, pretending not to hear. Miss Rivera kept talking, saying how the garden would be a safe space for the kids, a place to plant veggies and learn about nature. It means a lot to have volunteers like you, she added, and I realized she thought I was here by choice, not because Dad dragged me along. I didn't correct her, but the idea that Dad had bragged about me to someone else, no less, stuck with me. We broke for lunch, sitting on the tailgate of Dad's truck. The crew was joking around, but Dad was quieter, eating his sandwich and staring at the half-finished garden. I sat next to him, picking at my chips, trying to find the courage to say something. Finally, I went for it.